we don't actually always want to take the most clear removal of threat action in state one, because you can't do that forever, right? If the stressor is your test, you don't actually want to say 100% of the time, oh, well, we can put it off till tomorrow. So I guess my question is, what's the best way to go about recognizing what's the most ultimately beneficial intervention, even though it might not be the most effective in removing stressor intervention? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding your question, and it's a great question. What I'm hearing is that, there's this balance between removing the stressful stimuli or the threatening stimuli versus like empowering the student to actually deal with stress because life is stressful. Is that more or less the question? So a helpful analogy here is if you think about plants, plants that are exposed to sort of this optimal amount of stress are actually stronger than plants that aren't. And humans are the same way. If we never deal with stress in an effective way and find our own capacity for solution, we're not going to have a lot of resilience. And so I'm really glad you asked this question, because by no means is this presentation intended to say, like, we need to remove all stressful stimuli and never be in a state one. Because moving into state one and then back out of it is actually one of the ways we strengthen our ability to show up in the world. So as far as how to know when it's too much and when, the student can and should deal with the stress and sort of be with that stress, a lot of that is going to come back to your own personal judgment. The guideline I would use is if it starts to look like it's bordering on overwhelm, where they're kicking up into like more of a state two, or, all the way into a dissociative response, that's when I would provide more support and structure until the student can, going back to that idea of window of tolerance, the ultimate goal here is not to remove stress from students, but to expand their window of tolerance. So we do that through teaching proactive strategies, like how do you breathe? How do you cope? How do you think positive thoughts, or whatever it is that's helpful for that student? And actually letting them handle the situation.
I have two questions, one related, one unrelated. And kind of following up what you were just talking about, we had an activity we did a month ago about stress. And I'm going to oversimplify here, but the idea with students today, introduce the concept, stress is actually your friend. When you feel stressed before a test or just working or before a talk, it's because your body is helping you focus on certain things, right? And if you go into biology, your body is routing you to focus on this task that you care about, right? It's not a time to digest food, not a time to focus on reproduction, not a time to visits. Do this. So, would that be best described as state one? Like when you're having a stress response and a non-stress that's, a good amount, that's just going to help you be more focused on the task that you need to complete? Or is that not state one somewhere else?
It was a little bit echoey, so I just want to make sure I got the gist of what you're saying. It sounds like you're describing stress, being a functional response, like a little bit of stress helping you to focus on a test or helping you with an athletic type performance. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yes, that was the idea. And then I was asking, is that state one?
That totally is state one. And again, none of these states are bad. There's no morality implicit to any of them. They're all totally functional. Like if I were being eaten by a lion, I'd want to be in a state 4. If I was being chased by a lion, I'd want to be in a state 2. And if I needed to respond to something stressful, I want cortisol and adrenaline and all of my stress hormones on board so I can do that. The balance is like where humans tend to get stuck versus other mammals is hanging out in those states way longer than we need to. So as adults or children, like if you're just constantly in a state of mild stress, you're going to get sick, your immune system's going to be compromised, and you're going to be less functional, because what happens over time is the cortisol will peak and then kind of level out, and then it'll dip. And so somebody who's been chronically overstressed will actually have less cortisol in their bloodstream than someone who resources and gets back to a state zero. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So something I wonder a lot about in teaching and talking to students about current events is sort of making them aware of a lot of trauma that's happening in the world. That, and I just wonder how that plays into all of this. Is it different potentially from trauma going on in their own lives? But I do wonder sort of.
Yeah, really good question, and there's no simple answer. I've been thinking a lot about this, both for myself and my friends and for students in schools, that the world doesn't necessarily feel safe right now, especially if you spend a lot of time watching the news. So that's a very real thing, as on a nervous system level. It doesn't have to be an actual in the moment threat to life to feel like a threat to life. So, if you or a student is constantly exposed to disaster and stress and trauma on a global scale, and you personalize that, you're going to experience that in the same way that you would your own personal trauma in your own life. And so that, that's vicarious trauma. That's, there's a term called compassion fatigue that I've been seeing in headlines a lot lately. And again, there's no simple answer, but this is why, the second half of this presentation that we're not going to get to today is all around how mindfulness and trauma connect. And how if we think about that state zero, that's really a mindful state. It's a present moment state. And so as much as possible in response to that type of overwhelm, for me personally and with anyone I'm working with, I try to bring it back to what is in my control and what's happening in this moment. Like, in this moment, am I actually physically unsafe, or can I orient towards I have what I need, I feel okay, and here's what I can do about the situation. So focusing on solution rather than overwhelm. Sometimes giving students, even if it's sort of just like a perceived solution, like writing letters to their local representatives, or, holding a protest or doing something that helps them to feel like they have agency in the world, can reduce some of that. And then going back to this mindfulness piece, there's one thing I usually spend a lot more time on breath techniques. Things like the square breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, breath of fire, belly breathing, 3-part breath. These are all in the moment accessible strategies that anyone has to return their nervous system to a baseline. And there's a huge connection between our breath rate, even in this moment. Check in with yourself. How are you breathing? Are you holding your breath? Are you stuck? Can you breathe deeper? And how we feel, our nervous system. And so if there's any sort of key takeaway that we didn't quite get to, but that I encourage you to spend more time exploring, is how you can incorporate some active breath techniques for yourself and for your students to feel safe and feel grounded.